Hi, and welcome. As a person who has built a professional and personal life surrounded by folks that are often described as innovators and creators, I'm super excited that today on The Futurist Mom, we're exploring a topic that may sound simple, but is actually profound, which is how do we raise creative kids? And maybe even more fundamentally, why should we? Well, employers today say creative thinking is the number one skill needed, and we tell our children all the time to be creative. But what does that really mean? Is it about art class and craft projects? Or is it about something more essential and really deeply pragmatic, especially as they inherit a world being redesigned by the minute? Our guest today, Doreen Lorenzo, has spent her career at the intersection of design, innovation, and now education. She has served as president of Frog Design and built a career advising Fortune 100 companies on innovation and design thinking. She has also run and founded innovative tech solutions companies and is in demand as a board advisor and the World Economic Forum's network of global agenda councils. Not surprisingly, Texas Monthly has named her one of 15 innovators reshaping Texas. She's also a good friend of mine, and since 2016, Doreen has been assistant dean of the School of Design and Creative Technologies at the University of Texas at Austin, where she's been transforming design education and integrating creative thinking across disciplines, from business to engineering to medicine. As you'll hear, her philosophy centers around empathy, collaboration, and creating environments where people have the freedom to experiment and to learn versus fail. In addition to all of this, Doreen is now also a co-host of the podcast Creativity is the Job of the Future with Michael Baker, where they explore why creative thinking is the most essential skill in an uncertain world. Today, Doreen will help us understand what creativity actually is, why schools and offices often kill it, despite what they say, how AI is making it more valuable than ever, and more importantly, how parents can nurture it in their children even when traditional education works against it. Welcome to The Futurist Mom, Doreen. Hello, my friend. I'm so excited we get to have this conversation with the
Me
world
too.
today.
Me too. Me too.
I always provide a little context about if I know or don't know the guest. And excitedly, I've known you in the entire time that I think that I've been in Austin, although I was trying to remember how we met and I have absolutely no idea. But I feel like we've been woven in and out of each other's worlds for all this time, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you for joining me today for this conversation.
Oh, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, I love it. And of course, I've admired and loved what you've done and love the catalyst that you are to just so many different things around creativity and pushing the ball forward. So I really appreciate it. And your love of students and how you want to make them all so much better. I mean, that's just a passion that you have.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about my TEDx youth work as I was preparing for this podcast and thinking about how we helped the teams come together and how we had each of their, gifts somehow be revealed one way or another. And there was a lot that we did in that. And I really did love those years where I got a chance to express it that way. Because I was trying to think, again, we'll talk more about my kids and some of their journeys, but when one of them left Destination Imagination, I was trying to remember what they did instead. And I'm like, oh yeah, it was TEDx Youth. And that was such an amazing time. So thank you for that. But I also think, again, it's been in parallel with the work that you have done throughout your career, and particularly then in Austin, and very especially with the program that you started at UT that my son got to be a privileged early participant in. So as
Hmm.
we dive into this, again, for people who don't know either of us, and they're jumping into this conversation about, creativity, what I thought was such a great springboard is the podcast that you created. This is creativity is the job of the future, right? And for you and me, that feels like such a natural thing. Interestingly, I don't know that I've ever thought of myself as a creative person, which is also, I think, always fascinating. I was always like in support of and a champion of and wanted to create more opportunities for this kind of thinking. But when we talk about it, like I think one of the big misconceptions, what is creativity, right? How do you even start to define that for
Well,
people?
I talk a lot about this, Nancy, because I think we have to reframe what creativity means. So people think creativity is I'm creating the artifact, right? I'm painting the picture or I'm making the thing. And I don't think that's what creativity has become. And what I look at creativity as is it's a problem solving. So even if you are painting the picture or you're creating an object or you're doing a ceramics, you're problem solving. And I think that problem solving skill is something that needs to be instilled across the board in everybody because we live in a complex society. It's becoming more complex. And without these problem solving skills, you think the machine is going to do it all for you. Guess what? It's not going to happen. And so, how, for me, it's really looking at what does creativity mean? And that's when we started our podcast, that's what it was about. It was like these people are using these problem solving skills in all sorts of different areas. That is creativity. And now I will say, a lot of the fine artists and a lot of the people that I surround myself with in the College of Fine Arts want creativity to stay as this artistic endeavor where you get those artifacts that are produced, and but it's not it. And I think the more that we can spread that message about creativity, because with creativity comes those wonderful skills of empathy and really understanding problems and understanding people. Like it has its own trajectory. That is what we need going forward. And that's what we should be teaching all these students.
Was design thinking this bridge that took it from the purview of the artist and the way that their design process, again, I grew up in advertising agencies. That was the beginning of my career, is when I discovered the world of advertising. I was so excited. So I'll just take us back to the 1980s when my choices in a Southern school, a small, were doctor, teacher, lawyer, engineer, mom, banker, I think were my options. And I was like, none of those felt right. And I really, really struggled. And someone introduced me to advertising. I'm like, oh my God, I found my people. These are all like amazing. And I got to be around people who were literally quote unquote creative. So that's what they got paid to go do for a living. So at some point, design thinking comes around and they start breaking down. I'm like, that's what we've been doing for a long time. It was such an interesting thing to see someone now turn it into a separate approach or way of thinking or discipline, maybe, but was it designed so that we could take it to the bankers and to the lawyers and to the engineers?
Well, they systematized it. So I think you nailed it. Everybody's, anybody who was creative was using the concept of human-centered design, right? Because if you don't the principle behind this is you have to understand the user, you have to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve, and you have to understand if the problem is worth solving, right? So whether you're doing advertising or doing design or any kind of creative field, that's something that you look at. It was systematized, it became a process, and that is something that was further understood by the masses. And they were like, oh, I want to do that. Now, what I've learned all these years living in this creative world, right? And you probably have the same thing, is people want to be like that. Like there's a little bit of creative envy, like I want to do this and I want to be that. And so I think people generate like, oh, I can do this now. I could be this creative person. Unfortunately, I will say that just giving people a boot camp and sending them on their way is not how it works, right? This is something that has to be instilled in people. That's why it's so important to start when they're very young, but not stop. Don't stop at fourth or fifth grade when they start testing these kids. You got to keep it going. You got to keep that problem solving skills going so that as they get into high school, they get into college, they're still thinking like that. They're not thinking about how do I get an A. They're thinking about what's that problem I'm trying to solve, and is there really even an answer to that problem, which is another existential question a lot of these kids suffer from. It's like, well, maybe that's not the answer, and guess what, you're all going to solve this problem differently because
Right.
there is
And
no right answer.
well, and then we can talk about like what is the education system as currently designed, certainly in the West, doing or not doing to creativity. My small anecdote around that is when I was running the TEDx youth teams. The first years we attracted the kids who wanted to run the teams, who really wanted to be those creative, producers, who really thought a lot about the content, who thought about the theme. They were super excited about like producing something out of thin air. And they talked about what an amazing experience it was for them. By the time I finished my reign of that, maybe 6 or 7 years later, the kids that were attracted to were the kids who wanted to run logistics and operations and the budget, because they were, just so focused on being able to produce something that they could show that they had done, but they didn't really understand what went into doing it. And they were so afraid of making a mistake. They didn't want to be judged too harshly. They didn't want to put themselves out there. And I think that's a big part of the crisis that we're seeing right now, right? Is this like dimming of that light.
I mean, you just nailed it. Getting the answer, because they've moved so much to this multiple choice questions, right? They're constantly inundated by taking these standardized tests. They're all multiple choice. Well, multiple choice, it's right or it's wrong, right? In life, it doesn't work that way. When you're looking at a situation in a business or wherever, even in school, there's many different opportunities to solve problems, and we're not teaching them those skills, and so they're frozen in terror because they're living in the world of multiple choice. They're also not talking to other people, they're not engaging with teams, and nobody works in a silo. I mean, when you get out into the world, again, it's very complicated, and you're working with people. So it's not like I'm going to be in my engineering world, I'm just going to work in my engineering world. Not anymore, right? You have to work with a different groups of people. And so we've done these students a disservice by just testing the daylights out of them and not giving them the opportunity to think. And their frustration level when they realize that's not what the world is about is palpable. And listen, I've seen the breakdowns in my office on many occasions, right? Because that's just not how things work when you get out there. So yes, of course, those kids would have been like, I know I could do the accounting because I know how to do that, right? I know how to do the logistics, but figuring out the questions or trying to put together a program that made sense, that has different arcs to it, not done so much. And if you look at what we're doing, and we're taking away the humanities and we're cutting it down. Our job as educators, right? My job, I always say, I don't want to tell them what to think. I want to teach them how to think. I just want to teach them how to think. I'm not
Yep.
what to do, but just how to do it.
I'm feeling really super validated by my very liberal arts education from a tiny little Southern school. All those years, especially in the world of AI and very exponential or leading edge technologies, horizon technologies, I was always a little worried that my background didn't seem posh enough or strenuous enough to be able to be in these conversations. And now we're seeing such a breakdown across all kinds of things, right? And a return back to the humanities and the liberal arts and maybe even the smaller schools and the smaller classrooms that kind of forced us to think that way. So I'm very grateful that I was taught how to think, right? And I remember actually that was my son Zane, that you know very, very well, having long conversations. And he is my quote unquote most quote unquote, I guess, creative, although I don't know if that's true or not, but labeled that way. But why it was important to break down a sonnet, why it was important to understand the motivations of the characters in these particular stories, which he found just agonizing to do when he was in high school, right? But this is that kind of thinking that is so critical now, matched with, again, the sense of that you're taught to a rubric. I also remember having a very intense conversation one day. We were sitting at a Kirby Lane talking about one of his friends that had solved a problem, that something had happened in a classroom, and he went like just slightly outside the rubric and he got zero credit for it, Doreen, right? I mean, and I remember thinking how crushing that is for the exact thing that the future needs. Going the exact
Because
opposite
they
way.
have to keep, yeah, educators at that level have to keep things in a box. And that's how they're rewarded. I mean, the system's, I didn't really realize it until I got into higher education. It's like, oh my goodness, this is screwed up. When they're coming through, and if you step outside, it sounds crazy, but if you step outside of the lines, it's really scary and they don't know how to do it. I was working with this a couple of years ago, working with an MBA class, and it was around design thinking. It's like, okay, we got to go out and talk to people. And there was this silence, like literally, like, and there was a raised hand, like, yes. I mean, and most of these kids are, when you go back from their MBA, they've already worked, so they're in their late 20s. We have to talk to people. Yeah, you have to go out and talk to, like, actually talk to people. Yes, you have to actually talk to people. And it was just kind of shocking to me because it's like, well, can I get that from the information? Can I send them a survey? I could send them look at a Qualtrics survey. No, 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 no. You got to look at people in the eye, and you got to understand body language, because what they might be telling you and how they're behaving, you got to understand. It was very interesting to me, and that was kind of early on when I got to UT, and I was like, okay, yeah, we got an issue here, right? We have an issue on how we brought these students into the situation. And we could see then, if you look at the ramifications of why in so many organizations there was very little innovation, there was very little new things happening, because they weren't encouraged to do that.
Well, and I will say that we say that they're not incentivized in the classroom. They're often disincentivized at home. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they're disincentivized inside their organizations, right? To actually be
Mm-hmm.
a creative thinker and to take some risks around that, and to wonder if it's going to, even if you constrain the risk around it, like you try and make it, so that the whole company doesn't go down if you took a chance on something. But you and I have talked about this before, right? This conversation of we want innovation, but we don't understand creative thinking or creativity or what the environment needs to be in order for that to thrive, which I think is such a key part of this. We would need to have it done by Thursday, and it needs to be inside this box, and it needs to produce this much, revenue by such and such, and it can't take, whatever, because the earnings call will somehow be, a disaster if we took a risk on something and it didn't work. So I think that the pressure all the way around to be able to be producible results in a very short period of time with very baby steps, seems to be the way that we have now, thought that we're going to keep ourselves safe in a world of so much change and complexity. And you and I know it's the
Right.
exact opposite, right?
3 6. And when these students and these young people find that out, it's almost devastating for them, because it wasn't what they were taught. And so there's a lot of frustration around that. And so the whole purpose of building this program was, okay, I can't help what happened K through 12, but I can give them skills right now that are going to help them as they go out into the marketplace. And it's been eye-opening. I mean, I remember again, students bringing us these resumes, and I would start looking at these resumes, and they were literally all the same. And they're like, no, well, we're just using the template that they gave us. It's like, well, you you can't do that because then you're just paper dolls. There's no individuality. Like you can't do that. And I don't even know what I'm hiring for. Like if I look at your resume, I don't know what I'm hiring you because you're just part of the paper doll. And that was really hard for them to understand that connection. So just turning that around. I was talking to a student the other day, sweet kid, different school, not our school, but somebody asked me if I would have this conversation. Oh, it was just portfolio. Kid's talented, very talented, but it was like just an explosion of art and color. And I'm like, but what do you do? What's your story? Who are you? He goes, no, no, I just wanted to come in. I just wanted to be an explosion of color and art. I'm like, but I don't hire that. Like I'm an employer. I'm not hiring an explosion of color and art. I'm hiring a problem solver. So how did you think to get to this? Where did this come from? And I said, do they talk to you about this? No, no. And I thought, oh, you know,
So what's the
it,
line then between strategic thinking and creative thinking, right? Because I do think of myself as a very, very strategic person, and I do use color very intentionally, and I do design things in a certain way, and I do like think through the arcs, and I do all these things, right? But I would think of those as strategic skills as opposed to necessarily creative skills. Where's the line? Is there a line between those things, or how do they,
I
the
think the
spectrum?
lines get blurred. I think it is. I think you start out strategically trying to think about what the problem is you're trying to solve for. As you get into solutions, right, you might get into a more creative side. Could those words at some point be interchangeable? Probably. There's probably that crossover somewhere. But I always think of that the beginning part of this journey that you go on is, okay, what is that problem? And then you start looking at the problem from different perspectives and you start understanding the audience and you start looking at it. That's the strategy side because you haven't come up with any ideas. You're just, in a sense, getting all the information, all the insights, trying to learn what it is, what really is happening here. And once you kind of figure that part out, then you're like, okay, well, then what are the solutions that I would come up with? And that's where it kind of flips into what we would think of creativity. But again, let's get back to what we talked about before. I think we have to reframe what creativity is. I think creativity, honestly, gets a bad rap because when you tell, a lot of parents, when they hear their kids want to go into a creative field, they think they're going to be living in a dumpster. And that's wrong. I mean, it's
For sure.
wrong. And the kids are scared. They're scared to tell their parents that this is what they want to do. And so I think we have to think about like, no, those are skills, particularly now as we enter very intense machine age, those skills are really important. They're really, really important because if we don't learn how to problem solve and we don't learn how to use that, the machines, you're going to go down some pretty bad paths because guess what? The machine doesn't know everything.
So in this world where I read a headline, just as preparing again for this conversation, that 70% of executives think that creative thinking is the number one skill that we need to have inside our organizations, right? We see those kinds of stats even coming out of the McKinseys and the
Hmm.
least, I would say, creative, in my point of view, types of places. And yet the disconnect between wanting that so much and then not, again, inspiring it or making room for it or thinking about it. So at home, I would say, as a parent, it's shown up in a couple of different ways. One, we talked offline a little bit about this assessment that sometimes school districts make about whether or not a child is in a program that gets extra creative attention, about whether or not they're deemed quote unquote creative, right? And they have them do some sort of test to see if they can be in whatever the gifted and talented or creative, what do we call it? I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but where they get the extra attention for it. And then all of a sudden the kids think, oh, then I'm not creative. right? That somehow I'm not part of that club. I've had one child who went through that. You just said that one of your children went through that when they were young. So how do we get like, is that a good thing that they've got these programs in school that are trying to identify the kids that actually have a talent, quote unquote, in this direction? Or is that not? There's been a lot of controversy, or certainly around gifted and talented, period, but
I
particularly around the
think
creative side.
I think that's an old world concept. I think that was a concept left over from again from the artifact of create making stuff as creative, being the artist. I think in today's world, what we should be teaching all students is math and science and how to problem solve from a creativity. Those are essential skills, reading and writing and math and so like all of those skills and how to problem solve. Right. There should be problem solving that goes on. We talked about this before, like on a daily basis. Like, how do we do that? And that to me is where we're kind of doing a disservice to these young kids. We start them out like that, and then by the time we get into the standardized testing, it's all gone. But I think those gifted and talented programs, it's an artifact. I mean, in today's world, these kids are smart. Most kids are smart, right? Most kids are very bright, and you give them the skills and the tools, and they get smarter and they get brighter. Even kids that come from low performing schools, you give them those tools, they get smarter and they get brighter by doing that. And I think that's the part that we're missing. Like everything else to me in US education, we're kind of old school, right? With this agrarian education, they're off for 3 months during the summer. Like all of this stuff is just, does this really make sense? Should they be going to school 5 days a week? Should they have one day where they're really learning about the world out there? I mean, there's so many other ways to be teaching students for today's world and the future of what we see. And I think we're just missing the mark. So instead, we got rid of the education department because that seems like a really smart thing to do. Not.
Right,
Sorry.
right. No, yeah, you and I had a little bit of a conversation around that because I felt like, in all honesty, as much as I'm not in any way a supporter of most of the things this administration has done, I did look at the Department of Education and say, is it really serving our kids well, or is it keeping them locked in to your point, this old world framing of what we should be teaching our kids and how should we be teaching them when we're moving into a world that's requiring a completely different
Well,
set of skills.
right. I think with like any institution, I mean, I think we do need some oversight, but I think we should be evolving constantly, right?
Right.
Education is about evolution. So, particularly when you're trying to match the pace of where our society is going, we should be matching that pace within our education. And that's where we have not done that. Yeah, if you go to some of the, better performing public schools or private schools, they have all of that. But, I've spent a lot of time in low performing school with high performing students, and they don't have those skills. They don't have those abilities. And that's a disservice to these students. That's a terrible disservice.
So if you look at the world of online stuff, right? If you look at ask kids the number one profession they want to be, they will say influencer, right? Or TikTok person and somewhere in that world. Like it's often like relatively creative professions. The things that they're thinking about are not astronaut and not teacher and not, some of the professions that we would have associated with being at the top. There are a lot about things that they want to create and design and kind of like have more control of their own destiny is their perception around that. So has that increased the creative IQ around kids that are making their own videos and having these tools where they can create films and create music and do all kinds of things and not need a whole lot of other
I
gates?
I think they absolutely, I think it has, but we need to direct that. So they do this, but that's like, it's kind of like a hobby as opposed to saying, what can you do? Not that every kid's going to be an influence, but you know how to use their technologies too. You know how to use this, you know how to tell stories. What do you do with that? Right? If you want to be a TikTok influencer, you're telling stories. So maybe you're not going to be the TikTok influencer, but you're telling stories. What do you do with that? What do you do with that storytelling ability? So I don't think we've used that to help students say, but now what do I do with that? Where can I go with that? If I'm not going to be a TikTok influencer, what's my pivot? What am I going to do? And I think that's a really important aspect for students. So they fall back and they say, okay, I'm going to be an astronaut or I'm going to be, a teacher, whatever, which are, yes, all wonderful professions that we need. But I think we have to help kids also see as you're learning these skills, what else can you do with them? And I think that's a really important aspect. The other thing I will say is what we're seeing today is there used to be STEM, right? And there used to be creativity. Well, these kids, they code switch. You could watch it, you could watch them switch because they've learned how to code when they were 5 years old. They started in kindergarten, and now they're seeing that coding is kind of, they're using AI to do it. They just go back and forth. They toggle. How are we helping them use that skill? That's an amazing. I love watching them because it's not a fear. There's no fear like, oh my God, like my parents when they first got a VCR and they wouldn't go near it. Like it's none of that, right? They are. So we as educators aren't. We need to be helping them to understand that's those are kind of the superpowers that they can have that really will take them further.
Which takes me then to your podcast and the range of guests that you've had already in your first season. You did a great thing, which is a summary of the first season, which I thought was really helpful. So thank you for the time crunched ADD version of us. I was able to get kind of the lessons learned across the various interviews, but it was fascinating, right? You're talking to an ultramarathoner. You're not just talking to people in the design and creative fields, right? You're talking to an ultramarathoner. You're talking to a nurse. You're talking to someone who does recovery facilitation. So what are some of the things that has even surprised you as a person who spent her entire life in this field as you're talking to these people on the podcast?
I think I innately knew. I mean, I've been saying that creativity is the skill that everyone's going to need. And at one time, I even told our former dean that the College of Fine Arts will become the new business school. Like creativity is going to be the skill that everybody needs. I don't think I realized that until I interviewed some of those people. Like really realized that. And when I hear how creative these people are and what they do to live their lives, it was jaw dropping. I mean, the ultra marathoner, like going blind, that's a Monday problem. I've just got to figure out how to get to the finish line. Like, me, maybe I would have stopped, but it's like this constant problem solving and thinking about, okay, how do I do that? And finishing with broken legs, with wrist. I mean, it's just crazy, but it's an incredible skill. And he will say, well, I'm a logistics person, that's what I do, and I'm not really creative. And you're like, well, hell, you are, like, amazing. Or our recovery folks, you know they say that drugs are an obsession, and so their thing is, let's take this obsession of creativity and have that replace the drugs. And what they're seeing with the return on that is phenomenal. So putting that front and center, letting people be creative and be in a group setting where they don't feel ostracized, has really turned people around. That's, it was one of the podcasts that I literally cried on. I mean, it was so emotional to kind of watch that go on. So, or, the guy from NASA who said, listen, if we don't tell stories about what's going on in space and the program, we lose people with science. So we have to be storytellers. We have to be creative. We have to go out there to get people to want to understand how important these missions are and what we're doing. It taught me. I said it, but it really validated it. And we have like a kick-ass season, by the way, coming up now.
Okay, good. I can't
Yeah,
wait.
yeah, we have a
Uh,
really great one.
I'm sure there's no shortage of
Yeah.
people that you can interview around this topic, but it's going to be so interesting to see the range of voices. But when you go back to this idea, actually, it's really interesting when you talk about the intersection of addiction and risk taking and wanting to have an outlet for that. Again, Zane, who we keep talking about, like I would come home and he's like taking, hand sanitizer and lighting it on fire because when you heat hand sanitizer, there's no flame, but it can still combust something and burn something. My garage is going to be caught on fire, right? Or he would take food coloring and put it in little tin containers, like he would make a little tin pot out of it and stick it in the toaster oven and watch it evaporate because he wanted to see what would happen with food coloring when it evaporated and turned into powder. Like, just like crazy how shit. And it happened over and over again. And you're worried about your home. It is about, in some cases, not all, but needing a place where you can feel something. There's a kinesthetic reaction to something. You get a chance to actually like express. And there had not been very many places in their worlds and in their lives where they could. And interestingly, at that moment, actually, Zane ended up changing friendship groups and becoming involved with all the kids that were really highly immersive, again, artists or experienced design people or musicians. Like it turned out that actually that was the tribe that he was searching for, right? Where the kids who could really go and like take this things, all the intensity of what they were feeling and turn it into some sort of expression that other people could tune in with them. I think that's actually a really
I
fascinating thing.
I think it is, and I think what I always say is everybody wants to do that. I'm sorry, like that's why people have, they have their job, which is great. Like some people do their job and then they have these incredibly creative hobbies too, because you want to feel, you want to be something, you want to show something, you want to create something. Um, I have one of my daughter's friends, she's an accountant, brilliant young lady accountant, works in finance, and she does these most phenomenal needle points where you're just like, what? Like, and there, she designs her own, she does them all, and like very interesting to me. But it's that creative outlet that people need. But again, that's producing the artifact.
Right.
I always say that if you could understand that everything you do, you can problem solve. Like the world is not black and white. I think it's the answer. As we look at your beautiful red wall behind you, the world is just not black and white. And we've we've taught students and we've taught children for so long. It is choice A, B, C, or D. That's what we've taught them, but it isn't. It's this beautiful array of colors, and that if you understand that you have choices, and the decision that you come up with today might not be the one you would have done in a year from now, but the situation was different where you are today, and having them understand that and him being okay with that is really the skill we should be teaching everybody, because we're evolving. People change, and we have to teach them how to evolve and how to feel good about decisions that they're making.
Well, and then, there was I think it was a woman who had been CEO of YouTube that described it as FIO jobs, figure it out jobs. The very few jobs that anyone's going to be stepping into, even if it is a job as traditionally defined, is going to be something that has been patterned on things that have been done for the last God knows how many years, and we're going to keep doing it in the same way. And my oldest son, is an aerospace engineer, which you would argue is a very, linear, very logical, very left brainy kind of science and math and, extreme physics, et cetera. And yet all day long, they're designing literally a lunar lander that's going to land on the moon and have to stand up and operate as soon as it hits. It's not something that's ever been done before. And all day long are using, to your point, collaborative, creative skills, and
All
aren't
the
able to
time.
thrive if they're able to go do that. Actually, if you want to go talk to somebody on your podcast from that world, I think it's so fascinating to see how they think and how they're trying to
No, now you're
invent
giving me
things.
ideas. Okay, well, yeah, because but that's a great example of you think it's linear and it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And I think we're going to, as we again evolve, and the stakes are higher. People want more. Because we are 24/7, because information is all around us, because we see visuals from every part of the world and everything, the stakes get higher and higher. When I started in this creative world, there was no internet. So, with what we saw in the newspaper or what we read in a book, it was a very different world. You'd be on the telephone. This is now we're again, everything, you're getting real-time information constantly put at you, and so you have to think about, well, again, it's not as the same. So, and you're getting information, like if you can't solve a problem, well, there might be someone in a never part of the world who can help you and collaborate with you to do that. That's also a very different thing that's happening today, and you want to be able to teach students and teach people how to do that. Like that's okay. That's okay that you don't know everything, that there's other people out there that can help you too.
Well, now that's going to be my AI companion, right? My very discreetly designed LLM that's going to be very much know me and how I think and what I need to know and who the people are in the world that I need to know. So again, we're going to be in this interesting thing. I never vilify the technology. I think the technology is never the bad guy. I think it's how we use it, how we commercialize it, how we,
100%.
bring it into our worlds. And so I think that this idea of having this collaborator that is a digital tool, pro or con, like how do you talk to students about how they use these tools now in their work?
Well, we encourage the students to use the tool as a tool, right? It is a tool. We have come through our careers, Nancy. You and I could talk about a lot of tools that have been introduced in our careers that have changed the trajectory of people's jobs that they have. And they're great. I mean, they do make us better. Some, they make us move faster, probably not as good, So there's a lot of tools. AI is a whopping powerful tool, but it's a tool right now. And so use it like that. Use it as you're in advertising, so you remember mood boards. Use it as your mood board. that will give you inspiration, that may give you some ideas, but you have to, again, problem solve to understand, is that the right way to go, and tweak and use it. So we encourage our students, there's a lot of work behind how to use AI, because we think it's a really, we don't, it's not like don't use AI in anything that you do, but use it as that tool that might jumpstart you. I mean, I was a kid who grew up reading encyclopedias, like physical books, right?
Me
It
too.
was a tool, right? It was a tool that we used. I would get in lots of trouble if I copied the paragraph out of the encyclopedia about the Revolutionary War. Like, you couldn't do that, but I would learn something about it and then extrapolate into something. AI is a similar thing. Lots of information, big soup, pulls out all sorts of stuff. How do you extrapolate that to understand what's going to solve the problem that you're wanting to solve for? And does that make sense? And I think that's teaching them how to do that, and teaching them how to do that really from an ethical standpoint too, right? We got to be, we want to be truthful about stuff. We don't want to steal people's stuff. We want to be, we want to make sure that we're not doing harm when we use it. Like, all of those things I think we didn't do in the first round of social media that we're trying to do now with AI.
But we're seeing then, I'm seeing a gap being created with the kids who are very interested in these tools and want to play with them and are trying to figure out some of the things that you're describing around the ethical edges and how much they can is their thinking versus the machine's thinking. And other kids are going the opposite direction and don't want to touch it because they're afraid of some of those same things. Or they are illustrators and they don't want the machine to take over, or they are musicians and they don't want to become dependent on the machine or the technology. So how do we help sort of navigate that gap? Because I'm concerned about the kids who are not spending any time learning these technologies at all because they're afraid of them.
They will have to, and eventually it's like you kind of grow up and you begin to like coffee. Like, they will have to use those tools at some point. They may not use them as voraciously as others who love it and want to play with it, but they will have to do that. And so, um, keep introducing it and as breadcrumbs to students to show them how it might help them, not take over what they do. And I think that's the best we can do with these students, because it's going to, some people just takes a little bit more time, but that's okay too. I mean, if you want to learn your craft in illustration before and get really good at it, then when you're working with AI, you understand it a lot more too, like what's good and what's not. Oh, listen, maybe not having three arms is probably not what we want in our drawings. I mean, we play with it a lot. It's so much fun to see what it comes out with, right? So maybe that's not the best thing, but you also have to have the fundamentals and the understanding to know then to understand how to use it effectively too, right? So to use it as a tool, you have to have some fundamentals and some baselines. It becomes then a better tool for you to use, and you use it smarter and wiser.
Right. Yeah, I think that again, we're so on the front edge of this. Another guest potentially for your podcast is a really good friend of mine, Ela Colombo in Dubai, who's a designer and architect and does a bunch of physical installations. And for her, that tool has become such, when I say that tool, like she's developed a very, very sophisticated relationship with her AI and thinks of it so much as a co inspiration and really deepens what she thinks is possible to go do. And they've done extraordinary designs across, all kinds of different problems that they're trying to solve for in the UAE and around the world. So I think that again, we're going to become more sophisticated with where we know where we are and where the machine is, and sort of hopefully it stretch us as opposed to dumb us down. I think that's really the big
Well, I
wish.
think that's the idea. I think it is stretching. I mean, if you think about, when you talked about being an architect, when CAD first came out and architects could then bend angles and do things that they had never been able to do before, right? It it changed the trajectory there. So we're at that other inflection point, which is good. It's called the future. Future is good. We subscribe to the future, because guess what? Things are going to change whether we like it or not. So, hey, let's get in front of it to help it along, so we do it in an ethical and healthy way, as opposed to sitting in the back of the bus or behind it in the trunk crying about it. Like, that's not going to help the situation.
I'll say one more thing before we go into the more practical ways in which parents and families can think about this, but I think it's also creating environments that make this possible. There was a memo that went around Silicon Valley many, many years ago, and I've talked about this many times, but the difference between maker time and manager time. Do you remember that memo? Do you know what I'm
Yes,
talking
I
about, right?
do. Yes, I
Right. So
do.
makers think in terms of blocks of time, like morning, afternoon, evening, late night. And I was like, oh my God, yes. Right. So if I have a podcast with you now scheduled at whatever, 10 a.m., my whole morning is kind of shot because I've been thinking about it and I want to prepare for it. My whole brain goes around it. Like I don't schedule 3 other meetings prior to that. My partner and other people that are very much in the business world right now are still very much in manager time. Every half an hour, all problems can get somehow solved magically in 29 minutes or 59 minutes, right? And they just go on to the next and the next and the next, and they don't leave a lot of room for being able to think about things or strategically come up with something else or even problem solve in a more humane way with their teams around some of that stuff. So I think that in environments of our offices, again, I say we understand it, we push for innovation, we don't understand creativity. Having worked in advertising agencies, man, creative people sit around their offices really differently than account managers did or media people did, right? They had the friends who were throwing the pencil up into the wall and they were playing around with ideas and they were learning from each other. And someone had a good meeting and didn't have a good meeting. They dealt with success and failure differently. Like, how can we bring some of that into our work as we imagine the future, right? Can we go in and as you're developing these skills inside of us, or calling to, our deep creative people, and then we go into these environments that just like suck the life out of us.
Well, that's where the evolution is going to happen as businesses realize that they have to change. We've seen the evolutions of businesses over time, and I think that's what's going to happen. It's not like you have the floor where the creative people live anymore. I think it's when you go into a lot of environments now, you see they have the little lounge areas and they have whiteboards, and people are trying to evolve into something like that. Look at libraries. Look at what libraries have become, right? You don't just go there and read, like they're meeting places and they're gathering places and places where we can collaborate and experiment. And you look at a lot of, again, if you look at a lot of architecture that's being done for these business campuses, they are changing the dynamics, right? So we have workplaces. We can think, I mean, we can think really Pixar and years ago when they created those environments where they wanted to have those water cooler moments where people would meet. And they talked about open floor plans. Well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's just gathering places now where we can come and change and think about it. So I think it's going to be, again, there's this evolution over time because we have all this infrastructure, which is these, capital expenditures, these buildings that we have to retrofit if we're not building new ones to make that happen.
Right. And or the people who are working in more hybrid ways, figuring out ways to make that happen too. And I think that again, more creative thinking and more problem solving around that. So it's not binary that you're either in the office all the time or you're working in your, small bedroom all the time. They were finding these ways for people to still be able to connect and collaborate and do these maybe in smaller. We talk about in the world of nature and ecology around bioregional solutions. And I feel like we need to figure out what that if the application would be for being able to find more local ways in which I can create, environments where I'm around people and I get a chance to have these conversations and I get to do it, but I don't necessarily have to commute to an office really far away or to another city all day long. I just think we've done
Right.
very
And
little to really reinvent what that all looks like.
we haven't, and when all these organizations now calling people back to work, do we, I'm not sure we've solved anything. So we went from, being virtual to now everybody back in the office, and there is some sort of interesting hybrid. I mean, I've talked to a lot of organizations, the future of work stuff, right, that we tend to work around. Do you have people that every Wednesdays is meeting day or whatever? Like, there's ways you can do it. It just, you have to want to, right?
Right.
When it's an employee market, it changes. When it's an employer's market, it changes. We're in an employer's market right now. And so employers are like, I'm paying for this real estate, you're coming to the office. The
So,
pendulum, I've seen,
yeah.
the pendulum swings, right? There's a bit depending on the economy. When it's an employee's market, it, the story will become a little different and we'll have some evolution there.
It's fascinating to see employees so resistant, even though it is employer's market. That gives me actually a tremendous amount of hope. And I think part of it is the real estate maximization. Part of it is I think that, a lot of leaders are lonely when they don't have people around because that's what's their social group. So that's part of my theory around that. But I think the theory is that we collaborate more when we are together, right? That somehow we haven't
So I
built, I
think
think one
there's
of my
some
things is
truth to that.
we haven't built enough tools, I
Truth.
think, to make that easier to do remotely.
we're trying. We're at the very beginning of, the Miras and the Figmas and all that stuff. So we're trying.
VR.
We're at that we're at that early VR, right? We're at that early stages of how do you use them and what's there, but we're not there where it's 100%. Um, we do as a group when we're trying to problem solve. We do work better if we have people that we're bouncing ideas off of. Do we have to be all together in one room, or could we be elsewhere? That hasn't been fixed yet, but we do as a team where we're bouncing ideas off of each other. You get excited about stuff. There's something to be said about that. Now, sometimes then you got to take all that and you've got to go disappear into your hovel and kind of process it all, right? And so there's that, you need that opportunity to go, do that. Everything can't be, constant, like
Exactly.
big idea, because you have to execute the big idea. You have to figure out, is that executable, and can I get that done? How do I operationalize that? So I think there's room for all of it. We're just not quite there yet.
So let's turn the corner then as we wound down the podcast to say, okay, if you're at home and you've got this, this beautiful family that you're trying to help prepare for the future, and you're having this conversation looking at the future of work, which is a whole experiment in the making right now. I mean, there's so much that's being redesigned and rethought through around that. How are we best preparing our kids for the future? And if we say that we also believe that we want kids to feel confidence around their creative abilities, that's really the way I think about it instead of like creativity. So I just want them confidence in their ability to solve problems, their agency and being able to feel like they've got the skills to go and jump into something. If they want to create something, design something, build something, I think we've talked a lot about that as being important. It means that you have to have an environment that allows for that inside your home and encourage kids to know that they're doing the right thing when they're messing around. They're just trying to experiment and not just wasting time or feeling like they're, not efficient. And this one I go back to again, maker time at home means that you have some downtime from your devices. It means that you are, one of my kids, stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning all the damn time and I couldn't fix it. Like I that wasn't how he was wired, right? He wanted to be up late at night when the world was quiet, like messing around and playing with things. And finally you learn that that's great. That's where his brain is processing, as you said, in that quiet. So any other things that you think that parents can do at any age to help create the environment that makes that more successful and encourages that in their kids?
Take a step back. Don't fix everything. Parents fix everything. I'm probably as guilty as ever, but take a step back. We use this word failure. Nancy, I hate it, because failure, when you go K through 12, guess what? If you fail calculus, your parents aren't cheering you on, right? So the whole concept of failure, get rid of that. It's continuous learning. So we need to let our children learn. Sometimes they're going to learn it's going to work, and sometimes it's not going to work. But how do they get themselves out of it? And what a lot of parents do, probably again, I'm going to put myself, well, we got to fix it. I got to fix that problem. I got to let them do this. No. If we want our children to be great creative thinkers, let them go out and think and problem solve. And it doesn't always work out the way they thought it was going to be work out. So then what are you going to do about that? And I think that to me is a real missing. So yes, having, time to do this or whatever, but you as a parent should not fix it. Take a step back, stay away from the child, let the child figure it out. Take your step back, let them figure it out, let them sometimes have some pain. I know it sounds terrible, right? You don't want them to be puddles, but it's okay because they're going to get through it. And when they figure it out, and they feel so much better about it than when you did it. And if they're constantly turning to mom or dad to do it, it's not going to help them when they get into, my program. Like that doesn't help them, right? So I think that's one of the I think it's one of the best thing parents can do is let them problem solve. Let them problem solve.
Which then takes us to my last big ad for Destination Imagination. So that was one program that I got exposed to when we moved our kids to Texas that I did not know existed. It was an after-school program that puts together several challengers each year that kids anywhere from kindergarten, I guess now all the way through university, used to end in high school, but now I think it's going to university, form a team and produce some sort of experience to solve that problem and present it, right? It's a combination of engineering and storytelling and creative design, and you can pick a challenge that sort of speaks more to one than the other, but it's a really phenomenal opportunity for every week. Kids are working together after school to solve this thing and be able to go and communicate it to someone else, right? You said one of your kids, did both your kids go through it?
Yeah, both my kids did it continuously. I mean, it was just one of those fun things. I even was, I did a coaching with another parent on it. It was super fun, but why isn't that done in the classroom?
Right? I mean, this has been my thing,
I
and I
mean,
think
I love it and they should do have it, but why isn't it done in the classroom? Like,
I
why are we
know.
having to farm that out? And then some kids go, well, I'd rather play baseball. I don't want to do that, right? Which is the schedule that these kids keep. I want to go play, which is nothing wrong about baseball. I want to dance or whatever they want to do,
Right?
but this should be part of these challenges you're giving these students all the time. And the beauty about destination imagination that we need more of is they had to work in teams. That
Totally.
was great,
It was
right?
really
That
great
was a
and
really
really
good, yeah.
hard. I remember how I actually, Zane's team, like I want to say in third or fourth grade, when he came back exasperated that no one was listening to his ideas yet again. I actually hired a friend of mine, or I probably didn't hire him, I begged a friend of mine who did organizational development design, like team development, to come and coach and work with the kids for the afternoon and taught them all kinds of like little games and little skills for them to
It's great.
recognize how to listen to one another, how to solve for one another, how to yeah, how they dependent they were on one another and their thinking. Like it was great because I thought, again, we ask kids to collaborate, but we don't teach them how to do that. Just because you put your desks
How did you,
together doesn't mean that you know how to listen to other people's ideas and be able to express yours and have that exchange.
so think about if we did that every day in school, we had a destination imagination challenge, and they learned that. They learned the collaboration, they worked together on that. I think those are invaluable skills that they would take for them to our age. Like those are skills that you need. And I'm not sure why we don't. I mean, I don't understand it because those are skills that you need in any workplace environment you go into.
If there's any parent or any educator that's listening to this podcast that doesn't know about Destination Imagination, I would really encourage you guys to go check it out because in addition to this big challenge that Doreen and I are describing, they also had instant challenges that took between 5 and 8 minutes to work through as a team. And they were low cost. They were just little puzzles. So they were little. One of them, we went to a whole day full of DI challenge camp, and it was a bunch of materials on a table. Create an instrument that two professions could use and create a sales pitch for it, and they had to do it in like 8 minutes, right? They had to figure out how to take pretzels from the center of a thing that was taped off with a bunch of materials on the outside. And what my team actually learned is that the girls had a really great idea, the boys didn't listen, the team failed. So it's like there's so much you get out of doing that. And so even if you just take them at home, even if you don't do it inside your classroom or you don't have time to do it as an after school activity just to bring those things home, there's a zillion of those exercises, 17 uses for peanut butter that don't include eating. It just stretches your brain. It was such a good thing to do. And I'm thinking my alternate life of the 47 things I'd be doing on the planet if it wasn't this, I'd go become chief cheerleader for DI because I think that that will
Well, I
be the
think
thing that
DI or right or again anything that takes them out of the environment of the right and the wrong. There's one
yes.
way of doing stuff. That's what we want. If we take away anything, that's like there's very rarely, yes, math adds up. 2 plus 2 is 4. We get that. But in terms of problems that present themselves on an everyday basis, there's kind of, usually a few ways to solve it. And we want to teach them that. And we want them to feel comfortable with their decisions. And we want them to feel comfortable with working with different people. And we want them to know that if it didn't work, okay, what are you going to do? How do you pivot? That doesn't mean that you failed. It just means, you know, I'll leave you with this. Like scientific theory, which we kind of bow down to scientists. Scientific theory is all about the more failures you have, the closer you get to success, right? So it can go on for years, right? I get research money. I'm trying to find a cure for something, for example. I'm going to have failures, but now I'm getting closer to success. It's a really good thing. And we celebrate that. Now in business, you fail and it's like, well, you're going to fire that person? Like what's going to happen? Or in school, it's like you fail. It's good. So we're kind of screwed up in that respect, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because we should be teaching that consistently across every discipline. It's about the learning, right? It's about the learning. And we have people have that love of learning, not feeling like I hated school because I was always wrong, but that love of learning, we're going to be better. And again, it's not teaching it's not teaching somebody something, it's teaching them just how to think.
I love it. I mean, I'm trying to
So
imagine
glad,
like,
Nancy, you and I can't talk about this at all. I'm really like, I'm so sorry. Like, this is
well, and I love that you are
so
now a
boring.
grandmama baby. So not in addition to your very successfully grown children, but you now have little grandbabies that you get to like also share this wisdom with. Because I think that
And
this is really what we want the next generation, right? We want these kids to be really well held and embraced in this in a way that yeah, maybe we hadn't.
and guess what? We do a lot of playtime around just playing. Like I I'm I applaud my daughter and son-in-law. Those kids are not plopped in front of TVs and all. So it's all this like building and stuff and what we do and fingerprinting and going to playhouses, and I love that because the imagination goes wild and they feel really good about it. He FaceTimed me yesterday with his 2.5 oven mitts on and his skateboard, his little bicycle helmet on, and his knee pads that he wears, and he was some sort of surfer. That's what he said to me. He was a surfer, but he was so happy and he had to show me what he was. And I was like, don't ever lose that, kid. Like, don't ever lose that. That stuff is so
Right.
exciting and important, right?
Right.
You want them to feel really comfortable about it too.
I know.
So,
And I think that then for the middle school and high school parents, it's such a deep, good deep breath. As much as the grades are really important and we think they're going to help us get to the next thing and the next thing, the next thing, I do think that whole system needs to be relaxed. And I say this as a mother who had 3 children who she put them in very competitive school district, right? And they all went to really great colleges and they worked the system. But I think if I would do anything differently, it would be to like really try and take a deep breath around that and say that if you got a C in a class, it's actually not the end of the world. To your point, the thing that I learned the most from was the C that I got in AP chemistry. This thing actually got me into college because I was able to talk about how I got around that, you know? So who knows? It's not going to be
that's
the thing that
great.
necessarily takes you
And
down.
and by the way, they read the essays. So all the parents know that. They read essays. So the fact that the kid could write and tell a story about that is also really important.
Right. Good point. There
So
you go. All right. Well, we are out of time, my friend. I can't wait to go and hang with you again. And I'm really looking forward to the next season of your podcast. We'll make sure we put that as a link for people to be able to find that resource as well. And thank you for all that you have done throughout your entire career to, to champion, to open those doors for it, to show the importance of it, and now to help the next generation really embrace it with all of the complexity and tools that will be coming with us along the way. Thank you so very much.
thank you, Nancy. And again, I say it, you're an inspiration. Even doing this, you're always thinking 15 steps ahead, and it's impressive. So some days I want to get in Nancy's brain to like, how does she do that? So
Well, I'm grateful to be able to.
anyway,
I do it because I get to run around with all you guys. So I'm really grateful to have pinkers, people you need to know, and you're at the top of my list, Doreen Lorenzo. So thank you, and we will do it again soon.
thank you, Nancy. Have a good one. All right, bye bye.
Bye.